Hello, and thank you for coming back for round 2. In this video, we're going to primarily apply what we learned in part 1. I'll start with a brief review, then introduce argument form, give you some common valid argument forms, and most of this video is spent on practicing the method by applying it to arguments. And I'll close with a brief recap. So let's start with our review. When analyzing an argument, you can use the following process. Apply it systematically and in the order that I presented it here. Is it clear? First, identify the argument. In our readings, it may take a bit of practice to get really clear about what the author's conclusion and premises are. Remember, it takes practice. Look for indicator words and think carefully about what the author is trying to convey. Is it valid? Remember that validity is all about the form of the argument, not the content. So assuming all the premises are true, must the conclusion be true also? If you can find a reason why it may be false, it's probably invalid. Is each premise true? One by one, see if you can prove any premise false. Is it sound? If you found a false premise, the argument is unsound. If all the premises are true, then it's sound. But also remember that sound arguments must first be valid. All invalid arguments are automatically unsound, even if we find that all the premises are, in fact, true. That is why I think it's helpful to distinguish between the question of whether the premises are true from the question about whether the argument is sound. I have also listed some important terms for you to review. Let me start by introducing something new. In philosophy, when we present arguments, we often use them in what's called argument form or standard form. This involves listing and numbering each premise on a new line, and then listing the conclusion below the premises, also as part of the numbered list. Sometimes a C is used to denote the conclusion. Argument form helps us approach arguments systematically, and also has the feature of clearly and simply stating the most basic parts of reasoning necessary to reach the conclusion. Here are some common valid argument forms, presented in symbolic form. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but it does cover some important argument forms. You may want to pause the video here to write these down in your notes. If you recognize any argument that has the same form as one of these valid arguments, then you know that argument is also valid. I have also included a web page in Canvas that goes into more detail and provides examples with each of these valid argument forms. Consider this example. If there are no chance factors in chess, then chess is a game of pure skill. There are no chance factors in chess, therefore chess is a game of pure skill. Is it clear? Yes. Assuming we know what chess is, it's quite clear and well organized. Is it valid? If the premises are true, then we have perfect assurance that the conclusion is also true. Notice how closely the premises are linked together. This involves a hypothetical or conditional statement, which is just a fancy way of saying the premise is one of those if-then statements. If it is the case that there are no chance factors in chess, and the second premise asserts that it is in fact the case, then we know that chess is a game of pure skill. So, yep, this argument is valid. Is each premise true? Rather than Googling it or asking your friend the chess master to just think about it for yourself. Given what you know, are these premises likely true? Can you think of a compelling reason to suppose that either is false? The first really is about the meaning of the words. Clearly the concepts chance and pure skill are contrasting terms that are mutually exclusive. One can not have pure skill by chance or claim that what was merely a chance accident is somehow an act of skill. So assuming those concepts are clearly and correctly identified, the first premise looks true. The second, we might not be so sure about. But here consider that you might know that computers can regularly and reliably beat human competitors. This suggests that there is a basic but incredibly complex mathematical model at the root. Without additional reasons to suppose the second premise is false, we can probably conclude that premise 2 is also true. That means this argument is valid and sound. Let's take this next argument more quickly. If I'm in Bowling Green, then I'm in Ohio. I'm not in Bowling Green, therefore I'm not in Ohio. It's clear, assuming that BG denotes the one in which our university campus is found. Is it valid? Can you think of how it might be true that I'm not in Bowling Green but still in Ohio? Easily. I could be in Perrysburg, Toledo, or Columbus. I'd still be in Ohio, just not in BG. So this argument is invalid. That is, the conclusion does not necessarily follow from the premises, even though we know the argument is also unsound simply because it's invalid. Let's quick look at the premises. The first premise is true, but you may not know about the second since you don't monitor my every move, I hope. It turns out that it doesn't matter since this is a conditional statement. It doesn't matter whether I'm in fact in BG. If I was in BG, then it would also be true that I was in Ohio. Again, however, we know that the argument is unsound because it's invalid. So this argument is invalid and unsound. Consider this argument. All banks are financial institutions. BGSU is a bank. Thus, BGSU is a financial institution. This argument is clear enough, so let's move on to validity. Have we seen a similar argument that used this same form? All x are y, b is x, therefore b is y. Yes, that's the same form of the Socrates argument. So we know that all arguments that take this form are valid. Now, is each premise true? The first premise? Yes, that's true, so no problem here. The second premise? Nope. Obviously, BGSU is a university, not a bank or a financial institution. So this argument is unsound because one of the premises is false. So we should conclude that this argument is valid and unsound. Finally, consider the following argument. Eli favors affirmative action policies because they will do the most good over the long run, all considered. Dennis opposes affirmative action policies because they could lead to infringements of rights. Therefore, no one knows if affirmative action policies ought to be adopted. The argument is clear so long as we have some idea what affirmative action policies are meant to do. While the content may differ, generally speaking, affirmative action policies aim at correcting for previous injustices that occurred on the basis of race or sex, particularly with reference to education or employment. Is it valid? Does this fit one of the argument forms we saw previously? It doesn't look like it, which might mean it's invalid. So let's check the connection between the premises and the conclusion. Would the conclusion necessarily be true if the premises were true? Each premise features the perspective of one person and provides a brief reason why that position is adopted by that person. The premises are both about views on the same topic, affirmative action. The conclusion makes a claim about knowledge that no one knows in reference to the same topic. But do the premises say anything about what is known, unknown, knowable, or unknowable? No. This conclusion does not follow because the premises do not provide a tight enough link to support it. Upon closer examination, we see that the premises and conclusion are about subtly different things. Furthermore, both Eli and Dennis provide reasons why a policy should be adopted or rejected. Perhaps with further discussion, evidence, and reasoning, they can determine the extent to which their viewpoints are defensible. Another thing that may lead to confusion is that this is a moral argument involving moral value judgments. Some think that there is simply no way to resolve moral issues and thus no point in arguing about them. Roughly, this is a view called relativism. But this is a position that needs to be supported by arguments and compared to alternative viewpoints. We shouldn't assume this position without considering whether we have good reason to hold it among the various alternatives. In one of our first readings, we found that relativism is a very controversial view that most philosophers reject. To reject it, however, doesn't mean that there is necessarily an answer, or only one answer to a moral question. But what Eli and Dennis's arguments show is that we often have competing considerations to consider in what kinds of policies we adopt, which are not easy to resolve. But this doesn't mean we should avoid all such disputes or throw out all arguments that involve moral content. Both Eli and Dennis likely agree that racism and sexism is wrong, they just disagree about what is best to do about it. Since we have now seen that this argument is invalid, we know it's unsound as well. But since our third question first asks us to consider the truth value of each premise one by one, let's do that briefly. The best way to determine whether the premises are true is to go ask Eli and Dennis. But notice also that the reasons offered in support of the viewpoints tend to be consistent with the view offered. Those who think that a policy may produce the most good is often a reason for adopting it. Those who think a policy may violate rights in objectionable ways tend to oppose such policies. So short of asking Eli and Dennis, we can probably take these premises to be true. Even so, because we know the argument is invalid, even with true premises, the argument is unsound. So again, this argument is invalid and unsound. I have chosen very simple examples that are straightforward and easy to analyze, since our concern is not with the content of these particular arguments. Instead, our focus has been on developing a toolkit to help with argument analysis. So let's close with a quick recap. Philosophy is all about arguments, so we can benefit ourselves by understanding how to analyze them effectively. We have learned several helpful things to look for in the text, like keywords and certain patterns of inference. I briefly provided an argument to show the importance of arguing as a basic and necessary skill, even one that you probably rely on more than you think. Logic helps us think, communicate, and write more clearly, so taking the time to practice these skills will pay off in your other pursuits as well. Next, I introduce what we mean by arguments in logic and philosophy. An argument is a group of statements, one of which is supported by other statements that offer reason and evidence. Most importantly, we explored some basic tools to analyze arguments. When you come across an argument, follow this simple procedure. Is the argument clear? Is it valid? That is, does the conclusion necessarily follow, assuming all true premises? Is each statement true? And finally, is the argument sound? Analyzing arguments effectively takes practice, and we'll get practice on real arguments found in environmental ethics soon. As we proceed, remember to ask questions, read and reread, and discuss the arguments with others. Thanks for watching. Email me if you have any questions.